It's taken me so long to get this shot set up, so I'm in the middle. I really hope it's fine. So I often get asked by people, as an Open University student, how do you do practicals? How do you meet people and do fieldwork? How do you actually science? And I thought, well, as part of one of my biology modules this year, I have had to do some practical work in a remote online fashion. So I thought it would be fun to make a short little video so I can show what it's like doing some science as a remote student with the OU, how we go about designing an experiment, what trials and tribulations we had to go through, etc. So let's get straight into it. I'm studying environmental science and I had a biology module which included 5 practical experiments, and the main one at the end was focusing on pollinators and their behaviour. So we could pick any pollinator, whether that be bees, butterflies, etc., and look at a factor that changed their behaviour or caused a difference in the sites that they visit. So that could be looking at flower colour, that could be light intensity, wind speed, temperature, humidity, site variation, species variation, etc. My species identification looking at pollinators is generally so this was a nice little challenge to do. The first step was to choose what you want to look at, what you want to analyse, and design a research question. My main focus was I wanted to look at bumblebees because I have seen them around. I have noticed how they come out more in summer and spring, and I wanted to look more at why and what effects that things like temperature and weather had on them. Now, I knew a little bit about them. Bumblebees generally come out more during summer. I wanted to see if this was the case in my area, whether daily fluctuations in temperature had an effect, whether there are other confounding variables like weather or cloudiness or things like that, and also how this would affect other bee species like honeybees, for instance. After deciding on this question, I thought we need to go and find a site around where I live and see if we can find any to analyse. So I went to a field nearby, close to my house, just out on a walk one day, and I stopped because I could hear some mad buzzing. There was a row of willow trees on the side of the field, and I looked up and there were tens of bumblebees, which was great because it marked it out as a good site. The problem was willow trees are incredibly tall, so it was going to be difficult to measure or to accurately count A, how many bumblebees there were present, and B, standardise the method so I wasn't counting at different heights. So then I had a look at other sites in my area. This included going to a nearby stream. This is very nice. First impressions, there aren't as many willows as I would like from what I've seen. It's basically this side of a riverbank and they need to be this side so I can observe the bees better here. They're quite spaced apart as well, which will make it a bit more difficult for surveying. I then also went up St Catherine's Hill, which is in Winchester, because there are quite a few flowers this time of year, which is about April, May time. The problem was I could not find any bumblebees in either of these sites. I'm not gonna lie, that was the trickiest bit, was trying to find these insects that were in enough quantity for me to be able to use the data. What I managed to find was a cherry tree in the middle of my garden, which I'd never really noticed before. And what I found were tens of not only bumblebees but also honeybees, which was fantastic for analysis and meant that it got me out of a bit of a sticky situation. The next stage was to devise the experiment as to how I would measure these things. I decided, in order to capture enough temperature variation, I would sample every hour between 6 AM and 6 p.m. at night for 5 days. Every hour I would go outside and stand by the cherry tree, looking at a certain point on it, which I marked out with a colourful hoop, because resources. Observe or count how many bumblebees, how many honeybees visited the site inside the hoop, interacted with a flower for more than 2 seconds. I would count how many times that happened. I'd also try and identify the species of the bee. If not possible, then at least identify whether it was a bumblebee or a honeybee, and do that for 10 minutes every hour. The temperature data I recorded using a weather station that we have in the garden, where the data are freely available online. This will tell you things on temperature, solar intensity, wind speed, wind direction, humidity, precipitation, etc., etc. And so I calculated an average of the temperature within each 10-minute period within the hour. So if I was sampling between 1 o'clock and 10 past 1, the weather station would record data at 4 past 1 and 9 past 1. I'd take an average between those two values, which were usually the same, and then get a temperature value for that 10-minute period, and therefore for that hour. And so once the risk assessment had been made, the stage was all set for some very early get-ups and some attempting to identify bumblebees. The actual data collection took a long time, but was really good fun. There were some mornings where getting up at 5:30 for a 6 a.m. start of sampling was a little bit much. There were a few coffees. Rewind that. There were quite a few coffees sampled to get me through the day. It's the morning of day 3 of data collection. I made the mistake of falling back asleep in between counts. I haven't missed any, but I'm now incredibly tired. But no, it was interesting. It definitely improved my bee identification skills, particularly with bumblebees, looking at the colour of the abdomen, the colour of the thorax, what black and yellow stripes were there. The main observation I had was that bumblebees I saw more bumblebees in colder temperatures and earlier on in the morning. And then as the temperature increased, or I got to about 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, I was seeing more honeybees, which was an interesting observation. I did see a few mining bees, which are tiny little solitary ground nesting bees, which don't buzz per se, but it was interesting to see those also come up because I'd not seen one before. I didn't include them in the results though. And recording the temperature was very easy as well. Once I got back from a 10-minute count, as part of my routine, I would try and identify any bumblebee sketches which I'd made, which I wasn't able to do in the field. I then wrote down what species I'd seen, how many observations I'd made, and then also calculate the temperature average there. And then I'd basically have 40 minutes to do whatever other work I needed to, and then get ready for the next count. And what I weirdly liked is that I was doing another assignment at the same time for a different module, and it made me very economical with my time. So in the 40 minutes or so, the 45 minutes between counts, I would try and give myself one task to do and usually be able to get it done within those 45 minutes. If you add all those up together, you end up accomplishing so many different tasks throughout the day. So it's definitely something that's taught me about my working style for future. So yeah, that's another valuable insight. There were a few counts that had to be missed. One of them was for a job interview, another one was for making dinner, and another one was because I think I did fall back asleep and ended up missing one. But all in all, I got about 45 values over the 5 days. About 60 65 values for both temperature and observations, which meant I had a lot of data to be able to look at the relationship. So once I got all my spreadsheet filled out, I conducted a series of correlation statistical tests to assess the relationship between temperature and the visits themselves. I also looked at the difference in species and whether this changed with temperature, whether that changed throughout the day. Another thing which I wrote down whilst I was in the field was what the weather was like. So if it was particularly cloudy or there was some rain present, if it was particularly bright. I did it more as a qualitative note to myself, because taking that forward into the results, it could be an extra consideration. And now the main fun bit, which was looking at the actual results and their implications and the discussion surrounding the importance of temperature and bumblebees. So as the temperature increased, the number of bee visits also increased. As the temperature decreased, so did the number of bee visits. One of the reasons is that potentially bees have to raise their thoracic temperature, so the temperature inside their thorax, to a suitable level in order for them to fly and to warm up their flight muscles. And this requires energy. They have to use energy in their body to raise their temperature internally. The increased temperatures around them may mean that because they absorb heat from the environment, they don't need to expend as much energy in raising their internal temperature to fly efficiently. And therefore it means they can conserve more energy. It's a better survival strategy overall than necessarily flying at lower temperatures where they need to use a lot of energy. Another possible explanation is that because temperature generally correlates with light intensity throughout the day, your hottest part of the day is normally about 12 p.m, 1 p.m, and that's usually when the sun's at its highest point. And because they correlate so tightly and the brighter conditions generally are, the more colourful the flowers appear to bees, the more likely they are to be out and pollinating and searching for nectar. That could also be a possible explanation for why temperatures would increase bee activity. But we still don't know the precise mechanisms behind this. There could be multiple reasons. There could be another reason we haven't discovered yet, or something that we haven't thought about yet. So these are just some possible explanations. There was one day where it rained quite hard and there was no statistically significant correlation on that particular day, and that I generally attributed to the fact that it was raining. You may also think, wait, light intensity may also play a part in that because when it rains it's generally cloudy. However, there are about 3 or 4 days out of the 5 that were cloudy, and the other 3 had positive correlations between temperature and bee activity. So cloud I don't think played a part, or reduced light intensity I don't think played a part in the data I saw. And other literature I read said that potentially this is because of a weight thing. If a bumblebee gets wet or a honeybee gets wet by a raindrop, it then has to use more energy to make itself airborne because the water is quite heavy, and so it's generally a better survival strategy to go out when it's not raining. And what was exciting was that the bumblebees I saw coming out at colder temperatures and the lack of honeybees coming out when it's cold has also been looked at. There's a possible explanation that bumblebees emerge at colder temperatures to pollinate flowers to compensate for the lack of honeybees at that particular time of day. And this may have implications for global climate change. There is some possible resilience in these bees to cope with changing temperatures and to still be able to pollinate as local conditions change. But again, that's something we don't know. Global warming is a massive issue that obviously we are aware of at the moment, and that could have massive implications for bumblebees and for honeybees. And then if you think about it, all of our food sources, bees pollinate a great proportion of the world's fruit and veg and crops. And if these times when they're pollinating change or their distribution changes, we may not have the food availability and the food security in future that we have at the moment or have had previously. That's going to affect the number of people our planet can support nutritionally, which is obviously is also an ongoing issue. And so yeah, there is always the need to continue to monitor these behaviours, to continue to monitor how global temperatures may be having an effect, how this changes locally, how this changes based on species, how this changes based on crop species. We are still trying to find out more and still trying to understand more what could likely be the case. Hopefully finding out these answers will mean that we are better prepared for adaptation and to know what's going to happen next and how we can possibly mitigate against that. So in conclusion, bees are awesome, which we knew already. No, the main conclusion is, from this study, 80% of the data showed positive, significant correlations between bee visits and daily temperature. There was an observed qualitative difference between bee species and temperature. So bumblebees generally came out at colder temperatures, and honeybees came out later on in the day when it was slightly warmer. Rainfall could be an explanation for why there were a reduced number of bee visits on a particular day, and there are possible survival implications for adaptation, for species resilience against issues like global climate change for future. So I then spent many hours writing this all up and submitted it and had a lot of fun. And I hope this video has given you some insight into how we actually do science with the OU and generally, yeah, what kind of things we do and how it generally works. And if nothing else, maybe taught you a thing or two about bees. I don't know. Thank you very much for watching, and it's goodbye for now.